Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome to the Jewish Deaf Congress book author series. My name is Brianne Burger, and I'm here today with Louise Stern. Thank you, Louise, so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you here. And Louise is saying that it's a pleasure for her to have been invited. So I'm going to describe to our audience your bio, and then we'll ask you some questions. So Louise Stern is California-born, London-based artist and writer. Louise uses various forms of language to explore communication and isolation, attending the California School for the Deaf and in Fremont, Gallaudet University, and Sotheby's Institute, based in London. She grew up in an exclusively deaf community. She is the fourth generation of deaf on her father's side and third generation on her mother's side, with both parents coming from a Jewish background. She saw in literature and visual language a way to investigate and liberate. As an artist, her works have been exhibited internationally. As a writer, she has had a collection of short stories, Chattering, published by Granta in 2011, long listed for the Frank O'Connor Short Story Award. That's tremendous. And novel, Ismael and His Sisters, published by the same in 2015 and long-listed for the Warwick Prize. Her creative writing has been commissioned by publications, including Granta magazine, the Garage Museum of Contemporary Art, the Royal Academy magazine, and Radio 4. She has also employed other mediums, including dance, theater, and film in her practice. Her current projects include a feature film with Art Images and BBC Films as writer and director, as well as other TV, film, and art projects that are in development. She has a solo exhibition at Site, S-I-T-E, Santa Fe in New Mexico, which is scheduled for 2023, which is very exciting. And it's such an honor to be here with you today. And I can't wait to hear more about your experience of writing and updates about Jewish deaf authors. So thank you so much for joining us. It's my absolute pleasure to be here today. Thank you for having me. So would you mind starting by telling us about your books? Well, as you said, I grew up deaf with a deaf family within the deaf community. I also loved reading when I was growing up. And reading for me was a way of living a different life than the one that I was having. I learned that people that didn't sign, people that could hear, and what their experience was. And I realized that they didn't really understand my experience. So I was always wondering about how to express that using words and various mediums. And then I decided to write. So you have two books, right? One book is based on the short stories, and then the other one, Ismael and His Sisters. Can you tell me a little bit more about those two? Well, I started writing short stories because, as you can imagine, it's easier. At that time, I didn't have any money. I was a struggling artist in a big city, and I didn't have a whole lot of time. I needed to find other work, which was going to help me cover the bills and pay for food. And art is such a visual medium, much like sign language is visual. But people are able to attribute to art pieces whatever they want, whatever they see. And I didn't want any sort of pity for my deaf experience. And to me, it made more sense to use the written word to express how I was feeling. So I did start with different kinds of artwork and then moved over into writing. And the short stories just didn't take me as long to write because that's what they were, short stories. So I submitted them. Somebody was interested. I ended up writing some more. And at that point, I decided I really wanted to take a deeper exploration. And in order to do that, I needed to write a novel, which would allow me to explore ideas in more depth. So that's sort of the trajectory that I had, starting from short stories to a novel. And Louise, what was your inspiration in creating these? Was there an influence from your being deaf, from your being Jewish? What was the motivation behind writing these? Well, when you say the word inspiration, it's such a funny word. I wasn't sitting around and feeling massively inspired in that sort of way. I definitely didn't feel inspired. It was hard work looking for the words, and there were a lot of tired nights, but I knew I needed to express something more than that. So my family, my upbringing, my friends, and that whole experience, and the people that I love, their stories weren't out there, and I wanted to find a way to share those experiences. And there was something else that I wanted to say. Oh, in terms of Judaism, now my family is definitely culturally Jewish. And the story about where I come from, that connection is quite deep. Absolutely what our people have gone through, what my family has gone through, that's most definitely a part of who I am today. And I'm proud of that. As for faith, I do have to admit that I wouldn't say that I'm a religious Jew. Now, saying that won't make my father very happy. He might even be embarrassed. Sorry, Dad. But spirituality isn't something that I experienced as a part of my Judaism in my upbringing. And I think that has to do with, in World War II, there was a lot of spirituality that was removed from Judaism. And there are people that know about, that time of our life, and that the Jewish experience post World War II was very different. So I started looking for spirituality in other avenues. But yes, my Judaism does impact me and affects my work. And I think a big part of that is the discussion, right? With the Torah, it's not something that you read on your own. It requires discussion and debate. And that principle has definitely been an influence on me. In my family, as a deaf family, we were considered voiceless. But I would notice other Jewish families that would have, very strong presence in the world, politically and otherwise. And so I could understand that having a voice was equal to having power. But how would deaf people, and the people that I grew up with without a voice, have that sort of experience? And we couldn't. There wasn't. So my family was culturally Jewish and religiously Jewish, and that gave us a very different perspective on the world. And that absolutely has influenced me as an artist, but I wouldn't say that having faith in Judaism has that sort of impact. Well, it's really interesting to learn about your background and to understand what's impacted and influenced your writing. What would you like for people to take away from your books or learn from your writing? I don't know so much if I want people to learn about anything through my writing, but I'm hoping that they'll feel things from my writing: empathy, self-reflection, and hopefully self-reflect with a new perspective. I think every writer is quite different. Some writing is more about the mind, but the writing that I do has much more to do with feeling. Oh, that's great. Louise, can you share your experience in getting your books published? Was it quite easy for you to do? Was it a struggle to get them published? For other Jewish deaf writers, what would you say to them? What advice would you give them? Well, I would say to be persistent, and people just couldn't get rid of me. I was constantly in people's faces until my books got published. I received a lot of no's. A lot of people were not interested in my writing, but I kept at it. you really need to have a strong intuition and believe in yourself and adhere to your intuition. I think at that time, I mean, I probably should have listened to some of the feedback that I was getting, but I did go with my intuition. And at the end of the day, it ended up being correct. But what would I say to others that are aspiring writers, whether they're Jewish or not, deaf or not? At the end of the day, you need to be true to yourself. And I think that's really the best advice that I could offer anyone. Oh, that's great, Louise. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience with our audience. Is there anything else that you'd like to share? Yes, I'd like to say l'chaim. Thank you so much. And I would also like just to add an I love you to my grandmother, Ruth. Well, Louise, I'm sure your whole family is going to be excited to see you in this interview. I do hope so. All the way from Europe, where you're living, to participate in this program. That's fantastic. We really appreciate your having been here today. So thank you so much for meeting with us. Well, I really enjoyed it. Thank you for the invitation, and good luck with everything that you're doing. I remember going to the Jewish Deaf Congress when I was a child growing up, and it's really nice to see there be a revival and new energy brought to the organization. Yes, we're very excited to see participation and this revival, as you said. Thank you so much. And l'chaim to you. Bye.